Cha Hyun-woo gripped the armrests of his first-class leather seat until his knuckles turned white. Another woman was backing away from him, her face pale, her hands trembling as she dropped the champagne flute. It shattered against the cabin floor, the sparkling liquid soaking into the expensive carpet. I can't do this, Mr. Cha. You're just too much, she whispered, her voice breaking with a fear that made him feel like a monster. She didn't even wait for the plane to reach the gate. She scrambled toward the back of the private cabin as if he were a predator who had already bitten. Hyun-woo stared at the spilled wine, saying nothing. He was done. This was the 12th woman in 2 months. 12. The first had fainted before he even spoke. The second had lasted 5 minutes before the Ice King's gaze made her burst into hysterical tears. The third through 11th followed the same exhausting pattern. They were all beautiful, all hand-picked, and all utterly terrified of the intensity behind his eyes. One had actually apologized for being too small for his world before fleeing. The 11th had called him a beast in a suit and vanished. And now this one, number 12, was hiding in the galley, sobbing quietly into a napkin. "It's not you, it's me," she had said. But it was always him. He was the most powerful man in the Seoul underworld, but in a room for two, he was a ghost. What was the point of owning the sky if he had to fly through it alone? If you're ready to see how a high-flying air hostess brings the world's most dangerous mafia boss to his knees, don't miss a single second of this journey. Smash that like button right now and subscribe to Forbidden Afro-Korean Love Stories so you never miss a chapter of this intense power struggle. I want to meet you! Drop your name in the comments and let me know which part of the world you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. As the woman hurried off the plane, the moment the stairs touched the tarmac, Hyun-woo's phone buzzed. His lead strategist's voice was low and urgent. "Boss, the merger in London is at risk. You need a partner who can handle the pressure. I found someone, a flight attendant from the international routes. She's different. No flinch, no fear." Hyun-woo closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the cold window. He needed someone who could handle secrets that could sink a shipping empire, not another girl who would trip over her own feet when he looked at her. "Fine, put her on the return flight tonight," he muttered, his voice a hollow vibration. He stared out at the runway. 12 rejections. He was the Ice King, feared by prime ministers and rival syndicates alike. But he had accepted it. He was destined to be a man who was powerful in every way except the one that mattered. That night, the cabin was silent. Hyun-woo sat in the darkened lounge, nursing a whiskey. His previous assistant had been compromised by a rival family. He needed a vault, not a person. One leaked coordinate, and he'd be a memory before sunrise. The curtain to the galley slid open without a sound. A woman walked in, but she didn't shuffle. She moved with a dominant, quiet power that seemed to claim the oxygen in the room. She wore a crisp, fitted white blouse, the top buttons slightly open, and a patterned scarf tied neatly at her neck. Her deep brown skin glowed under the cabin's amber lights, and her long, voluminous waves fell softly over her shoulders. She didn't bow. She didn't tremble. She didn't even acknowledge the 3 armed guards standing at the door. She leaned over him, her elegant oval face coming inches from his, her perfume, a mix of high-altitude air and something dangerously sweet. She reached past him to adjust his seatbelt, her hands steady, her gaze locking onto his with a knowing, seductive composure. For the first time in his life, Cha Hyun-woo forgot how to breathe. "Mr. Cha," Ifeoma Daniel said, her voice a calm, velvet challenge. "You look like a man who spent too much time being feared and not enough time being served. Shall we begin?" The hum of the Rolls-Royce engines at 30,000 feet usually acted as a sedative for Cha Hyun-woo. But tonight, the air in the cabin felt charged with a strange, static electricity. He sat in the oversized leather captain's chair, his dark navy suit jacket discarded on the ottoman, leaving him in a black silk shirt that felt too tight against his chest. He was waiting for the flinch. He was waiting for the moment this new woman, this Ifeoma, would realize who he was and begin the inevitable crawl toward the exit. Instead, the curtain pulled back, and she stepped into the lounge with a grace that was almost offensive in its composure. She didn't look at the floor. She didn't look at the guards. She looked at him. "Mr. Cha," she said, her voice a rich, steady alto that didn't carry a hint of the tremor he had grown to expect. "I've prepared the bluefin tuna and the 1945 Romani Conti you requested. Would you like to dine now, or shall I bring you a damp towel first?" Hyun-woo didn't answer immediately. He leaned back, his sharp jawline tightening as he tracked her movement. She moved around the cabin like she owned the air it was flying through. Her deep brown skin glowed under the recessed LED lights, and the way her cream and black scarf was knotted at her throat suggested a woman who valued order, and perhaps enforced it. "You're not from the usual agency," he noted, his voice dropping into that low, dangerous register that usually made people's knees buckle. Ifeoma didn't blink. She reached for the crystal decanter, her movements fluid and precise. "The usual agencies provide girls who think a private jet is a fairy tale. I've worked international routes for a decade, Mr. Cha. I've handled ambassadors in crisis and billionaires in tantrums. You're just a passenger, with a very expensive taste in wine." A ghost of a smirk touched Hyun-woo's lips. It was the first time in a month he hadn't felt like a leper in his own home. He watched her as she leaned over the small table to set the glass down. She was close, so close he could see the soft shimmer of her eyeliner and the calm, knowing depth in her dark eyes. Most women avoided his gaze. Ifeoma held it until he was the one who felt the need to look away. "Your strategist said you were different," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "He said you had no fear." Ifeoma straightened up, smoothing the front of her crisp white blouse. "Fear is a waste of a good flight, don't you think? If this plane goes down, we both hit the ground at the same speed, regardless of how much I trembled beforehand. And if we stay in the air—" She paused, her lips curving into a subtle, seductive smile that didn't lose an ounce of its professional authority. "Then there's really no reason for me to be afraid of a man who is currently trapped in a metal tube with me." The tension in the room shifted. It was no longer the heavy, suffocating weight of his reputation. It was the sharp, electric pull of two predators recognizing one another. Hyun-woo reached out, his fingers brushing the silk of her scarf as she moved to depart. He expected her to jump. He expected the gasp. Ifeoma stayed perfectly still. She didn't pull back. She simply looked down at his hand, then back at his face, her expression one of amused curiosity. "Is there something else you need, Mr. Cha? Or are you just testing the thread count?" Hyun-woo withdrew his hand, his heart hammering a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. He was the Ice King, the man who swore no woman could satisfy the intensity of his world. Yet, as Ifeoma turned to walk back to the galley, her long hair swaying against her shoulders, he found himself breathless. She hadn't just handled him. She had dismissed his power as if it were a minor turbulence. "Ifeoma!" he called out. She paused at the curtain, looking back over her shoulder. "Yes?" "Don't go too far. I think the flight is going to be longer than I anticipated." "I'm not going anywhere," she replied, her gaze lingering on his for one heartbeat too long. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The scent of the Romani Conti lingered in the cabin, thick and intoxicating. But it was the silence following Ifeoma's departure to the galley that truly unsettled Chahyonu. For the first time in his life, the Ice King felt the heat of his own blood. He didn't just want a flight attendant. He wanted the composure she wore like armor. He needed that steadiness anchored to his side before the plane touched down in a city where every shadow held a blade. When the landing gear finally engaged with a hydraulic whine, Hyunwoo didn't stand to leave. He waited until the rest of the crew had disembarked, leaving only the soft hum of the auxiliary power and Ifeoma, who was methodically checking the overhead bins. She had changed into a tailored black trench coat, her patterned scarf still perfectly knotted, her expression as unreadable as a closed vault. "Ifeoma," he said, his voice cutting through the quiet of the cabin. She turned, her hand resting on the edge of a locker. She didn't look tired, despite the cross-continental haul. She looked ready. "The car is waiting for you on the tarmac, Mr. Cha. My job for this leg is complete." "Your job for the airline is complete," Hyunwoo corrected, standing up and closing the distance between them. He stopped just outside her personal space, but the sheer gravity of his presence usually made people retreat. Ifeoma simply tilted her head, waiting. "I am offering you a new position, one that doesn't involve safety demonstrations or serving wine to mid-level executives." He pulled a single sheet of heavy vellum from his breast pocket. It wasn't a standard corporate contract. It was a list of terms written in a hand as sharp as a scalpel. "I need a partner for the next 6 months," he continued, his eyes locked onto hers, searching for the crack in her resolve that never came. "A woman who can stand at my side in rooms where men lose their lives over a misplaced word. You will be my personal envoy, my shadow, and, when necessary, the woman the world believes has finally tamed the Ice King." Ifeoma took the paper, her fingers brushing his with a fleeting warmth that sent a jolt through his frame. She scanned the numbers, figures that could buy a fleet of the very planes she worked on, and then she looked at the clause at the bottom. "Benefits only," she read aloud, her voice smooth and devoid of judgment. "No emotional entanglements, no expectations of forever, just a tactical arrangement with physical permissions." "I don't do forever, Ifeoma," Hyunwoo said, his jaw tightening. "And you don't look like a woman who wants to be saved. You want resources. You want to never have to say sir to a man you don't respect ever again. I am offering you the keys to a kingdom, provided you can handle the heat of the throne." Ifeoma let out a soft, melodic laugh that caught him off guard. She stepped closer, invading his space this time. She reached up, her deep brown fingers adjusting the lapel of his navy suit. She was so close, he could see the gold flecks in her irises. "You think you're offering me a deal, Hyunwoo," she whispered, using his name without the honorific for the first time. The sound of it in her accent made his heart skip a beat. "But you're actually making a plea. You're terrified that if I walk off this plane, you'll go back to being a man who everyone fears, but no one touches." She didn't wait for him to deny it. She leaned in, her lips inches from his ear. "I'll sign. But let's be clear about the benefits. I am not a subordinate you bought. I am a luxury you've earned. If you can remember that, we won't have a problem." She pulled back, the contract still in her hand, and gave him a calm, dominant smile that left him more vulnerable than if she had drawn a gun. She walked toward the exit, her heels clicking rhythmically against the floorboards. "See you in the car, boss," she called back over her shoulder. Hyunwoo stood in the empty cabin, his breath hitched in his throat. He had the contract, but as he watched her silhouette disappear into the night, he realized he wasn't the one in control of the terms. The Grand Hyatt Ballroom in Seoul was a cathedral of crystal and whispered malice, the kind of place where reputations were built on the sharpness of a diamond and destroyed by a single misplaced rumor. Cha Hyun-woo moved through the crowd like a dark tide, his hand resting possessively on the small of Ifeoma's back. She was a vision in a gown of midnight blue silk that hugged her curves, her shoulders bare and glowing under the chandeliers. She didn't look like a flight attendant tonight. She looked like the reason the room had gone silent. "Stay close," Hyunwoo murmured, his voice a low vibration near her ear. "The vultures are circling." "Let them circle," Ifeoma replied, her voice smooth and untroubled. "I've handled intoxicated dignitaries in confined spaces, Hyunwoo. A few socialites in a ballroom won't break my stride." The vulture arrived in the form of Mina, a high society heiress whose family had spent years trying to secure a match with the Ice King. She intercepted them near the champagne fountain, her eyes raking over Ifeoma's deep brown skin with a disdain that was as sharp as the glass in her hand. "Hyunwoo, darling," Mina purred, ignoring Ifeoma entirely. "I heard you'd hired a new domestic. I didn't realize you were bringing the help to the gala. Does she even know which fork to use? Or should we have the kitchen bring her something more suited to her origins?" The air around Hyunwoo turned lethal. His jaw tightened and his eyes darkened into the terrifying voids that usually sent people running. But before he could utter a word that would likely end Mina's family's credit line, Ifeoma stepped forward. She didn't lose her composure. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she donned her professional Sky Queen mask, a smile that was blindingly bright, perfectly practiced, and utterly cold. "Oh, hello," Ifeoma said, her tone dripping with the melodic politeness of a pre-flight announcement. "I'm Ifeoma, and you must be the interior decor? You've blended into the wallpaper so effectively I almost missed you." Mina's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "Excuse me? Do you have any idea who I am?" "I imagine you're someone very important to yourself," Ifeoma continued, stepping into Mina's personal space with a dominant elegance that forced the heiress to back up toward the service entrance. "But as a professional, I've noticed you're showing signs of overconsumption. Your speech is slurred, and your bitterness is leaking through your foundation. It's a safety hazard, really." "How dare you?" Mina hissed, raising her hand as if to slap the composure off Ifeoma's face. Ifeoma caught her wrist midair. The movement was so fast and precise, it looked like a dance. She didn't squeeze hard enough to bruise, but she held Mina in a grip that suggested she could snap the bone if bored. "In my industry, we have a protocol for disruptive passengers," Ifeoma whispered, her face inches from Mina's, her gaze locking onto the other woman's with a terrifying calm. "We escort them to the rear and ensure they don't bother the high-value guests. Since you're currently acting like trash, I think it's time for a disposal." With a graceful, effortless shove, Ifeoma redirected Mina's momentum. The heiress stumbled back, tripping over her own heavy train, and fell backward through the swinging kitchen doors. There was a loud, metallic clatter, followed by a wet thud, as Mina landed directly into a large, wheeled industrial trash bin waiting for the evening's scraps. The kitchen staff gasped. Hyunwoo stood frozen, his parted lips betraying his absolute shock. Ifeoma turned back to him, smoothing her gown and adjusting her silk scarf with a practiced flick of her wrist. She looked entirely unruffled, as if she had just finished a routine safety demonstration. "She was obstructing the aisle," Ifeoma said simply, her eyes meeting his with a playful, knowing spark. "Shall we find that tuna now, boss?" Hyunwoo looked at the closed kitchen doors, then back at the woman who had just treated a billionaire's daughter like a misplaced carry-on. He felt a sudden, violent surge of admiration that made his chest ache. He didn't just want her at his side. He was starting to realize he couldn't imagine being anywhere else.
Ifeoma,
He breathed, his voice stunned and captivated. You are unthinkable. I know, she smiled, taking his arm and leading him back toward the center of the room. Now, keep your eyes on the horizon, Hyunwoo. We have a kingdom to rule. The mahogany table in the private wing of the Sheila Hotel was long enough to host a small war, and the atmosphere was just as lethal. Cha Hyunwoo sat at the head, his expression a mask of bored stone, though his fingers drummed a rhythmic, dangerous beat against his crystal glass. Across from them sat Chairman Park, a man whose smile didn't reach his eyes, and whose reputation for double-crossing was the only thing larger than his shipping empire. Ifeoma sat at Hyunwoo's right hand, draped in a gown of liquid gold that made her deep brown skin look like it had been kissed by the sun. She wasn't eating. Instead, she was performing a silent, high-altitude scan of the room, her eyes moving with the practiced precision of a woman who had spent years identifying the exact moment a passenger was about to snap. Your new acquisition is quiet, Cha, Park remarked, his gaze lingering on Ifeoma with a patronizing tilt of his head. Usually the women you bring are either crying by the appetizer or trying too hard to look like they belong. This one, she just watches. She's not an acquisition, Park, Hyunwoo said, his voice dropping into that terrifying hollow register. She's the reason I haven't walked out of this room yet. Be careful how you address her. Ifeoma didn't need the protection, but the heat in Hyunwoo's tone made something in her chest tighten. She leaned in, her shoulder brushing against his, a gesture of tactical intimacy that looked perfectly natural to the observers. She reached for the wine, her movements fluid and calm, and as she poured, she leaned toward Hyunwoo, her lips inches from his ear. He's lying about the Busan port coordinates, she whispered, her voice a velvet thread only he could hear. Hyunwoo didn't flinch, but his eyes cut to her. How do you know? Watch his left hand, she murmured, sitting back and taking a slow, elegant sip of water. Every time he mentions the southern docks, he taps his ring finger twice against his thumb. It's a self-soothing gesture. He's also checking his watch every 4 minutes, not because he's busy, but because he's waiting for a confirmation call that hasn't come. He's over-leveraged, Hyunwoo. He's not here to partner. He's here to beg for a bailout he's too proud to name. Hyunwoo turned his gaze back to Park. He began to notice it then, the subtle, frantic twitch of the chairman's finger, the way his eyes darted to his phone every time a waiter moved. The Ice King felt a surge of adrenaline that had nothing to do with the business deal and everything to do with the woman beside him. She was reading a Mafia legend like a flight manifesto. You seem distracted, Chairman, Hyunwoo said, his smirk returning with a lethal edge. Perhaps the confirmation you're looking for regarding the Busan shipment has been delayed? Or perhaps you'd like to tell me the real reason your accounts are currently frozen in Singapore. Park's face went from pale to a sickly gray in a matter of seconds. He choked on his wine, his composure shattering like cheap glass. How could you possibly? My fiancé has a very keen eye for turbulence, Hyunwoo interrupted, his hand moving to cover Ifeoma's on the table. He gripped her fingers firmly, a silent acknowledgement of her brilliance. The deal is off, Park, and if I see your ships near my docks again, I'll ensure your frozen accounts become permanent. As they walked out of the hotel, the cool night air of Seoul hitting their faces, Hyunwoo stopped by the car. He turned Ifeoma toward him, his hands gripping her waist with an intensity that bordered on desperation. He looked breathless, completely captivated by the woman who had just dismantled a billion-dollar lie with a single observation.
How did you do that?
He breathed, his eyes locked on hers. Ifeoma smiled, a calm, dominant expression that suggested she still held all the cards. She reached up, straightening his silk tie with a slow, deliberate touch. When you've spent 10 years making sure 300 people don't panic while flying through a thunderstorm, you learn to see the cracks before the lightning hits, boss, she said softly. You wanted a partner. I'm just showing you what one looks like. Hyunwoo didn't respond with words. He simply pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers, finally realizing that no woman could satisfy him, because he had been looking for a subordinate when he actually needed a queen. The sprawling penthouse atop the Lotte World Tower was a sanctuary of cold glass and sharp angles. But for Cha Hyunwoo, it had begun to feel like a cage. He stood in his private ensuite, the steam from the rainfall shower clinging to the marble walls. He had just stepped out, a single black towel slung low around his hips, his damp hair falling over his forehead in dark, unruly strands. He stared at his reflection, the Ice King stripped of his armor, feeling the weight of the benefits-only contract pressing against his chest like a physical bruise. He heard the click of the heavy oak door to his study, then the unmistakable rhythmic tap of heels crossing the hardwood. No one entered this wing without a 3-step security clearance. No one, except the woman who currently held the keys to his composure. Hyunwoo stepped out of the bathroom into the adjoining study, expecting her to pause, to look away, or at the very least, to offer a startled apology. Instead, he found Ifeoma standing by his mahogany desk, a stack of tablets and high-gloss paper in her hands. She was dressed in a sleek, charcoal gray pencil skirt and a silk blouse that matched the amber glow of the sunset outside. She didn't flinch. She didn't blush. She simply looked him up and down with the same professional, discerning gaze she used to check a cabin for safety hazards. The logistics for the London merger have shifted, Hyunwoo, she said, her voice as smooth and cool as the marble behind him. The rival syndicate has moved their shipment to an earlier slot. I have the new flight manifests here. We need your biometric signature on the digital clearance within the next 10 minutes if we want to beat the sunrise. Hyunwoo stood perfectly still, the water still dripping from his shoulders. Ifeoma, I am currently undressed. I have eyes, Hyunwoo. I noticed, she replied, stepping closer until she was well within the space a normal person would consider a no-fly zone. She held out the tablet, her gaze meeting his with a calm, dominant intensity. But a private jet doesn't wait for a wardrobe change, and neither does an assassination attempt. Sign the document. He looked at the tablet, then back at her. The air in the study was thick with the scent of his cedarwood soap and her faint, floral perfume. The power dynamic he had spent a decade perfecting was evaporating in the heat of her indifference. Does nothing move you? He breathed, his voice dropping into a low, desperate vibration. I have had women flee this room because I looked at them too harshly while fully clothed. You walk in here while I am vulnerable, and you treat me like a delayed departure. Ifeoma leaned against the desk, a small, knowing smile playing on her nude lips. She reached out with her free hand, her fingertips grazing the damp skin of his forearm as she guided his hand toward the tablet. The touch was brief, but it felt like a brand. You're only vulnerable if you think I'm looking for a weakness to exploit, she whispered, her eyes locking onto his. I'm not looking for a king to bow to, and I'm certainly not looking for a man to fear. I'm looking for a partner who is functional. Now, sign the manifest, boss. We have a kingdom to run, and you're wasting fuel. Hyunwoo took the stylus, his hand momentarily unsteady, a sensation he hadn't experienced since his first day in the syndicate. He scrawled his signature, his eyes never leaving hers. He was the most powerful man in Seoul, a man who swore no woman could satisfy the sheer weight of his presence. Yet, he felt completely handled by a woman who refused to acknowledge his boundaries. Ifeoma took the tablet back, tucked it under her arm, and turned to leave. At the door, she paused, looking back over her shoulder with a playful, seductive spark in her eyes. "By the way," she said, her voice a velvet caress, "the gym is clearly working for you. But don't be late for the briefing. I don't like to keep the pilots waiting." As the door clicked shut, Hyunwoo let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He leaned against the marble, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had spent his life building walls that no one could climb, only for Ifeoma to walk through the front door as if she owned the locks. The flight back from London was plagued by a turbulence that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the heavy, suffocating silence in the master suite of the private jet, a space designed for luxury that currently felt like a pressure cooker. Cha Hyunwoo stood by the mahogany sideboard, his movements erratic as he poured himself a drink he didn't want. Every time Ifeoma moved past him to secure the cabin, his skin felt like it was humming with a low-voltage current. He was the Ice King, a man whose very name silenced rooms. Yet, for the last 3 days, he had been the one following her lead, the one waiting for her nod of approval, the one rearranging his schedule because she had deemed a route suboptimal. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had inverted, and the realization was starting to make him unravel. "Enough," he rasped, the word sharp enough to cut the air. Ifeoma was in the middle of checking the latch on a storage unit. She straightened slowly, her deep brown skin radiant against the cream silk of her uniform. She didn't turn around immediately. She took her time, smoothing her skirt, before finally meeting his gaze with that terrifying, serene composure. "Is there a problem with the service, Mr. Cha?" she asked, her voice a calm, velvet challenge. Hyunwoo bridged the gap between them in 3 predatory strides. He trapped her against the bulkhead, his large hands slamming against the padded leather on either side of her head. He loomed over her, his chest heaving, his sharp jawline rigid with a mix of frustration and raw, unadulterated desire. "The problem is that you aren't afraid," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "You walk through my life like you own the keys to the kingdom. You handle me like I'm a child, Ifeoma. You treat the most feared man in Seoul like he's just another passenger who needs to be managed." He expected her to shrink. He expected the flinch that 12 women before her had given him. He wanted her to acknowledge his power, to give him back the control he had lost the moment she adjusted his seatbelt on that first night. Instead, Ifeoma leaned forward. She didn't pull back an inch. She moved into his space, her chest brushing against his silk shirt. She reached up, her cool, steady fingers tangling into his jet black hair, pulling his head down until their lips were almost touching. Her eyes weren't filled with terror. They were filled with a dominant, quiet heat that made his knees feel weak. "You're right, Hyunwoo," she whispered, her breath hitching only slightly, though her gaze remained absolute. "I am managing you, because if I didn't, you'd burn this whole world down just to feel something. You think your power is in making people tremble, but true power is being the only thing that can make you stay still." She slid her hand down from his hair to his throat, her thumb resting over his racing pulse. "You've spent your life looking for a woman who could survive your intensity. You found her. But now you're realizing that surviving you isn't enough for me. I intend to rule with you." The collision was instant. It wasn't just a physical crash, it was a total emotional surrender. Hyanu's lips met hers in a desperate, breathless crush, but he wasn't the one leading the kiss. Ifeoma was. She dictated the depth, the pace, and the hunger. She was the one who pulled him closer when he tried to breathe, and she was the one who broke the contact just as he began to lose himself. She stepped back, leaving him breathless and stunned, his eyes locked on her as if he had lost his internal compass. She adjusted her neck scarf with a knowing, seductive composure, her expression reverting back to the professional air hostess in a heartbeat. "The descent into Seoul begins in 20 minutes, she said, her voice steady and fully in control. "I suggest you straighten your tie, boss. You look a little affected." As she walked toward the galley, Hyunu slumped against the bulkhead, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had spent his life thinking no woman could handle him, only to realize that he was the one who couldn't handle her. She wasn't just his partner. She was the one holding the leash, and for the first time in his life, he didn't want to break free. The morning sun bled through the floor-to-ceiling glass of the Seoul penthouse, casting long amber shadows across the rumpled silk sheets. Cha Hyun-woo lay awake, his chest rising and falling in a slow, heavy rhythm as he watched the light catch the gold of Ifeoma's skin. For the first time in his life, the silence of his bedroom didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a victory. The collision on the jet had been a revelation, a desperate, breathless surrender that had finally shattered the Ice King's isolation. He felt anchored, his pulse finally settling into a peace he hadn't known was possible. He reached out, his hand hovering just above the curve of her shoulder, wanting to pull her back into the heat of the moment, to hear her admit that she was as undone by him as he was by her. But before his fingers could make contact, Ifeoma moved. With the fluid, athletic grace of someone used to functioning on 4 hours of sleep in 3 different time zones, she rolled out of the bed. She didn't linger in the warmth of the sheets. She didn't offer a shy, morning-after smile. Instead, she walked toward the center of the room, her long, voluminous hair a wild, beautiful halo around her face, and began a series of deep, rhythmic yoga stretches. Hyun-woo propped himself up on one elbow, his brow furrowed, his dark hair falling over his eyes. "Ifeoma?" "Good morning, Hyun-woo," she said, her voice as steady and melodic as a pre-flight briefing. She transitioned from a downward dog into a low lunge, her muscles rippling under her deep brown skin. "The sleep was restorative. I feel significantly more focused for the briefing with the London board today." Hyun-woo felt a cold splash of disbelief. He stood up, the black silk sheet draped low around his hips, and walked toward her. He loomed over her, his presence a dark, powerful shadow. But she didn't even look up as she shifted her weight. "Restorative?" he repeated, his voice dropping into that low, dangerous vibration. "Last night wasn't a tactical exercise, Ifeoma. It wasn't about focus." Ifeoma straightened up, her expression calm and fully in control. She reached for a bottle of water on the nightstand, taking a slow, deliberate sip before meeting his gaze with a knowing, seductive composure that drove him insane. "Of course it was," she said simply. "High-stakes negotiations require a release of physical tension. You were carrying a great deal of stress, boss. I merely helped you manage it so you don't make emotional errors during the merger today. Consider it part of the benefits package we agreed upon." The words felt like a slap. He had opened his world to her, have let her see the man beneath the Ice King, and she was categorizing their intimacy as a maintenance schedule. He grabbed her arm, not roughly, but with an intensity that demanded she acknowledge the fire between them. "You're lying," he hissed, his face inches from hers, his eyes locked on her as if he were trying to find the crack in her armor. "You felt it. You weren't managing me when you were calling my name, Ifeoma. You were as lost as I was." Ifeoma didn't flinch. She leaned into him, her hand resting against his bare chest, her thumb tracing the erratic rhythm of his heart. She looked at him with a gaze that suggested she understood the effect she had on him, and that she enjoyed every second of his struggle. "Maybe I was," she whispered, her voice a velvet caress that made his knees weak. "But I'm an air hostess, Hyungwoo. I'm trained to handle turbulence without losing my heading. Just because the flight was bumpy doesn't mean I'm changing my destination." She patted his chest twice, a patronizing, dominant gesture that made him want to roar and pull her back to bed at the same time. "Now go take a cold shower," she said, her smile bright and professional. "The car leaves in 40 minutes, and I've already updated the itinerary. You have a kingdom to rule, remember?" As she walked toward the bathroom, her silhouette a picture of absolute confidence, Hyunwoo slumped against the bedpost. He was the most feared man in Seoul, yet he was currently being dismissed by a woman who treated his heart like a carry-on bag. He was the one begging for a sign of weakness, while she was already moving on to the next departure. The neon lights of Gangnam blurred into streaks of electric violet and cold blue as the armored sedan pulled up to the curb of the underground gala. Cha Hyun-woo stepped out, his tall, broad-shouldered frame immediately drawing the eyes of every guard in the perimeter. He looked every bit the untouchable titan in his tailored charcoal suit, but his focus was entirely on the woman stepping out beside him. Ifeoma was a vision in a sleek, obsidian-black jumpsuit that moved like a second skin, her voluminous hair pinned back into a practical, yet regal crown. "The perimeter feels thin," Ifeoma murmured, her voice a calm thread of silk beneath the thrum of city traffic. She didn't look at the guards. She looked at the second-story windows of the surrounding buildings and the way the valet's hands shook as he took the keys. "Too much silence for a district this loud, Hyunwoo." "My men have cleared the floor," Hyunwoo replied, though he felt the familiar prickle of heat at the back of his neck. He had spent his life in the line of fire, but tonight, having Ifeoma at his side made the stakes feel agonizingly high. "Stay behind me once we enter the lobby." "I don't stay behind anyone," she reminded him with a knowing, seductive composure that briefly distracted him from the danger. They had barely crossed the threshold of the glass-fronted atrium when the world fractured. The sharp, rhythmic crack of a high-caliber rifle shattered the silence, a bullet whistling through the space where Hyunwoo's head had been a second before. The glass doors exploded into 1,000 glittering diamonds. Hyunwoo reached for his sidearm, his instinct to shield Ifeoma taking over, but she was already moving. With the fluid, calculated speed of a woman trained to handle cabin decompression and unruly threats in midair, Ifeoma didn't scream or duck in panic. She grabbed the lapel of Hyunwoo's jacket, using his own momentum to pull him behind a massive marble pillar just as a second round sparked against the stone. "Southwest balcony, 3rd floor," she snapped, her voice devoid of fear, radiating a dominant elegance that anchored him. "The shooter is using a suppressor, but the muzzle flash caught the reflection in your watch." Before the syndicate guards could even orient themselves, a disguised assassin emerged from the service stairwell, a blade glinting in the dim light as he lunged for Hyunwoo's exposed side. Hyunwoo prepared to meet the strike, but Ifeoma intercepted. She moved like a shadow, using the assassin's own weight against him. With a brutal, practiced efficiency, she caught his arm, twisted, and drove her heel into the man's knee before slamming his head into the marble. It was over in 3 seconds. She didn't look at the fallen man. She reached into her waistband, pulling out a compact tactical device she'd taken from the jet's security kit. She jammed the signal, cutting off the shooter's communication before looking back at Hyunwoo.
Hyunwoo stood breathless, stunned, and completely captivated. He had seen thousands of soldiers, but he had never seen anyone handle the chaos of an ambush with the same calm authority she used to serve a drink. He looked powerful, but in this moment, he was visibly affected. His lips parted as he stared at the woman who had just saved his life without losing her heading.
"You're bleeding," she noted, stepping close to him. She didn't check his wound with a frantic touch. She reached up, her cool fingers adjusting his silk tie as if they were still in the safety of the penthouse. Her gaze locked onto his, steady and fully in control. "It's just a graze from the glass. Don't ruin the suit by fussing over it." "Ifeoma," he breathed, his voice a low, desperate vibration. You could have been killed.
And you'd be a memory if I had stayed in the car,
she whispered, her eyes glowing with a quiet power. "I told you, boss. I'm not just a passenger. I'm the one who ensures we reach the destination." As his security team finally swarmed the area, Hyunwoo pulled her into the shadows of the pillar, his hands gripping her waist with a raw, emotional intensity. He realized then that she wasn't just his best asset or his tactical fiancée. She was the only person in the world who could see the Ice King in the middle of a war and decide he was worth the fight. The silence of the penthouse following the ambush was heavier than any gunfire. Cha Hyunwoo stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his reflection ghost-like against the glittering Seoul skyline. His charcoal suit jacket was gone, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, and a small adhesive bandage marked the spot on his temple where the glass had grazed him. He looked every bit the powerful sovereign, yet his hands, usually as steady as a surgeon's, were restless. Ifeoma was at the sideboard, methodically organizing the documents for their next departure. She moved with that same infuriating, dominant elegance, her obsidian jumpsuit reflecting the city lights. She hadn't mentioned the shooting once since they returned. To her, it seemed, it was just another bit of turbulence to be managed. A line item in their benefits-only contract. "The car for the airport leaves at 400, she said, her voice a calm, professional velvet. "I've already coordinated with your security detail to bridge the gap in the perimeter. You should sleep, Hyunwoo. You have a long flight to Dubai."
Is that all this is to you?
Hyunwoo's voice was a low, jagged rasp that cut through the sterile air of the room. Ifeoma paused, a digital tablet in her hand. She turned slowly, her deep brown skin glowing under the amber recessed lighting. Her expression was the same one she wore when explaining a delay to a passenger. Composed, polite, and utterly detached. "I'm not sure I understand the question, boss. We had an incident, we managed the threat, and now we continue with the schedule. That is the agreement." Hyunwoo bridged the distance between them in 2 strides, his presence looming, dark and overwhelmed. He didn't stop until he was inches from her, his shadow swallowing her light. "The agreement is a lie. I watched you put your life between me and a bullet today. I watched you dismantle a killer without a second thought. And then you walked back in here and started checking flight manifests like we didn't just share the same oxygen." He reached out, his fingers trembling as they grazed the silk scarf at her neck. For the first time, he didn't look like the Ice King. He looked like a man who had lost his internal compass. "I swore no woman could satisfy me, because I thought I needed someone I could control. But I was wrong. I don't want a subordinate. I don't want a work wife who treats our intimacy like a maintenance schedule." Ifeoma didn't flinch, but her gaze softened, a flicker of something raw and unprotected finally breaking through her knowing gaze. Hyunwoo, don't do this. Emotional entanglements are a distraction. We both know how this world works. I don't care about the world, he breathed, his voice breaking with a vulnerability that would have stunned his rivals. He dropped to one knee before her, his large hands gripping her waist as if he were holding onto a lifeline. The man who made prime ministers tremble was now looking up at her with a stunned, captivated expression. I'm begging you, Ifeoma. Stop being my assistant. Stop being my shadow. Be the one thing I can't manage. I don't just need your protection. I need you. The silence stretched, thick and electric. Ifeoma looked down at him, her lips parted, the calm mask finally shattering. She reached out, her fingers tangling into his jet-black hair, pulling his head against her. The dominant elegance was still there, but it was now laced with a fierce, quiet heat. You're asking for a lot, Hyunwoo, she whispered, her voice no longer professional but intimate and heavy with a new reality. If I stay, it won't be as a subordinate. I won't be handled. Then rule me, he replied, his eyes locked on hers, completely surrendered. Just don't leave the room. Ifeoma didn't answer with words. She pulled him up, her mouth meeting his in a kiss that wasn't about stress relief or tactical release. It was an admission of defeat for them both. The Ice King had finally found his match. And for the first time in his life, he didn't want to be the one in control. The private terminal at Incheon International Airport was bathed in the soft, clinical glow of twilight. But inside the executive lounge, the atmosphere was one of absolute, unshakable power. 2 years had passed since a panicked air hostess had first adjusted a Mafia boss's seatbelt, and the world they inhabited had been utterly restructured in her image. Ifeoma Daniels sat behind a desk of polished obsidian, her silhouette framed by the logo of Daniels Global Logistics, a firm that now controlled the very supply chains the Seoul underworld relied upon for survival. She was dressed in a tailored cream power suit that complemented her deep brown skin, her long hair swept back in a sophisticated, sharp look. She was no longer managing passengers. She was managing an empire. On her desk lay a report detailing the final acquisition of a European shipping line, a move that effectively made her as untouchable in the boardroom as her husband was in the streets. The heavy doors to the lounge opened, and Cha Hyunwoo walked in. He didn't enter with the cold, isolated aura of the Ice King, who once sat alone on bedroom floors. He moved with a grounded, predatory grace, his jet-black hair styled with the same expensive polish, but his expression was no longer hollow. He walked straight to Ifeoma, ignoring the 5 high-ranking lieutenants waiting for his command in the hallway. He stopped behind her chair, his large hands resting on her shoulders. He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of her ear as he looked at the acquisition papers. I heard the board in London surrendered before the first vote was even cast, he murmured, his voice a low, captivated vibration. They said the CEO was too intimidated to even look you in the eye. Ifeoma tilted her head back, meeting his gaze with that familiar, knowing composure. She reached up, her fingers tangling with his as she pulled him closer. I told them the same thing I told you 2 years ago, Hyunwoo. Turbulence is only a problem for people who don't know how to fly. They chose to land before I forced them down. Hyunwoo let out a soft, triumphant laugh, a sound that still shocked those who had known him before. He moved around the desk, pulling her up and into his arms. The benefits-only contract had long since been burned, replaced by a partnership that the world viewed with a mix of awe and terror. They were the sovereign couple of Seoul, a dual-engine force that had silenced every rival who thought they could exploit a black African outsider or a softened boss.
The gala starts in an hour, Hyunwoo said, his eyes locked on hers with a raw emotional intensity that hadn't faded since the night he begged her to stay. The elite of this city are waiting to bow to the woman who built a $2 billion empire while they were still trying to figure out how she tamed me.
I didn't tame you, Hyunwoo, Ifeoma whispered, her hand sliding up his chest to rest over his steady, rhythmic heart. I just gave you a reason to stop fighting the wind. You're finally flying at the right altitude. He pulled her into a kiss that was slow, dominant, and fully equal, a collision of two sovereigns who had found their match in the middle of a thunderstorm. As they walked out of the lounge, hand in hand, the guards bowed low. They didn't just bow for the Mafia king anymore. They bowed for the woman who had done the unthinkable. She had looked into the heart of a beast and seen a king. And in return, he had given her the world to rule. They stepped into the night, the city lights reflecting in their eyes. The flight had been long, and the climb had been steep, but as they looked out over their shared kingdom, it was clear that the Ice King and his queen were only just beginning their ascent. 4 moral lessons from the story. 1. True power is self-control, not control over others. Cha Hyunwoo spent years building an empire based on fear, only to find himself isolated and unsatisfied. He finally found fulfillment not by dominating a woman, but by meeting someone whose inner strength and composure forced him to master his own intensity. 2. Competence is the ultimate equalizer. Ifeoma didn't gain respect through her title or her background. She gained it through her unwavering excellence. Whether it was identifying a security threat or managing a multi-billion-dollar merger, her skill set made her indispensable and allowed her to enter a world that was designed to keep her out. 3. Vulnerability is a bridge, not a weakness. Both characters viewed emotions as a liability. Hyunwoo saw them as a curse, and Ifeoma saw them as a distraction. The story teaches that true transformation only occurs when you are brave enough to be unprotected with the right person. 4. A partnership of equals outperforms a hierarchy. The story shifts from a boss/assistant dynamic to a sovereign couple. It highlights that when two powerful individuals stop competing for the lead and start flying at the same altitude, they can build an empire far greater than they ever could alone. If you enjoyed seeing Ifeoma and Hyunwoo build their empire, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe. Did you love the trash bin scene or the moment Hyunwoo finally dropped his guard? Let me know your favorite chapter in the comments below. Stay tuned because the next cross-cultural romance is already cleared for takeoff.